The countryside of Verona's childhood was a tapestry of endless green fields, the scent of damp earth, and the quiet rhythm of a simple life. Verona, a striking black girl with a brilliant mind and a heart as gentle as the rural breeze, grew up in a modest home. Her parents, people of boundless warmth and tireless work ethic, gave her everything they had. They taught her that kindness was a currency more valuable than gold, a lesson she carried into every aspect of her life. Then there was Aurea. Brought up in a world of crystal chandeliers, high society galas, and sophisticated culture, Aurea's life was the stark opposite of Verona's. Yet, a chance encounter during a summer retreat years ago had forged an unbreakable bond between the two girls. Aurea, despite her wealth, fiercely loved Verona's grounding presence, and Verona adored Aurea's vibrant, unapologetic energy. For years, Verona had dedicated herself entirely to her books. She possessed a singular, unwavering dream: to secure a brilliant education, land a successful career, and finally give her sweet, aging parents the comfortable life they so deeply deserved. When graduation finally arrived, it was Aurea who insisted on the next step. "You are moving into my place in the city," Aurea had declared, brooking no argument. "Just until you find a job and get on your feet. It's huge, it's empty, and I need my best friend." And so, Verona packed her modest bags, kissed her tearful parents goodbye, and stepped into the dazzling, chaotic world of the city, taking residence in Aurea's sprawling, sunlit penthouse. Verona's fierce dedication did not take long to bear fruit. Within weeks of moving in with Aurea, she stood before the mirrored elevator doors of one of the city's largest corporate conglomerates. She had walked into the final interview with her head held high and walked out with an offer letter for the position of Human Resources Manager. It was her lifelong dream realized in crisp, black ink. She could already picture the pride shining in her father's eyes. Despite her newfound corporate success, Verona remained a creature of quiet habits. While Aurea spent her evenings at upscale lounges and society dinners, Verona sought refuge in a small, ivy-draped reading cafe just 2 blocks from the penthouse. Books were her sanctuary. They offered romance, adventure, and philosophy without the complications of real-world men. In truth, Verona had never dated. To her, men in the real world were exhausting. She viewed them as arrogant, endlessly full of themselves, and a distraction she simply couldn't afford. Why entertain a man who thought the world revolved around him when she could build a world of her own? The cafe became her evening ritual. A cup of chamomile tea, a thick novel, and the comforting hum of the espresso machine were all she needed to find absolute peace. Peace, however, was a foreign concept to Aurea. While Verona's mind was filled with employee relations strategies and literary classics, Aurea's mind was entirely consumed by one man, Richard Park. Richard was a global phenomenon. A famously handsome Korean football player with a lethal strike on the pitch, he had captured the hearts of millions. But what the tabloids constantly marveled at was his character. Unlike the stereotypical, ego-driven athletes Verona so deeply despised, Richard was known for his profound humanity. He was non-judgmental, notoriously kind, and poured millions of his own salary into global charities. He cared for the marginalized in a way that was entirely abnormal for someone of his staggering wealth and fame. Verona, of course, paid no attention to this. To her, he was just another wealthy man chasing a ball. But to Aurea, he was a god. Aurea's wild imagination kept her in a state of perpetual, frenzied longing. She had never met him, but that didn't stop her from desperately wanting to be his wife. She spent hours analyzing his interviews, buying exclusive merchandise, and daydreaming. "I'm telling you, Aurea would sigh, draped dramatically over the living room sofa. "I can see it. Waking up next to him. The way I'd kiss him when we're tangled in the sheets, he's perfection. Absolute perfection." Verona would just roll her eyes, turning a page of her book. "He's a man, Aurea. I'm sure he leaves his wet towels on the floor just like the rest of them." It was a rainy Tuesday evening. Verona was curled up in the plush armchair of her bedroom, the soft glow of a reading lamp illuminating the pages of her latest historical fiction novel. The penthouse was quiet, the sound of rain tapping gently against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Suddenly, the door burst open. A high-pitched scream shattered the tranquility of the room. Verona jumped, nearly dropping her book, as Aurea bounded inside. Her eyes were wide, shining with unshed tears of pure, manic joy. "Aurea, what on earth?" "I got them!" Aurea shrieked, waving two sleek, holographic lanyards in the air. She threw herself onto the foot of Verona's bed, bouncing with uncontainable energy. "I did it! I pulled every string, I called my father's people, I called the team's people." Verona blinked, trying to slow her racing heart. "Got what?" "Tickets, Verona. To Richard's match this Saturday." Aurea gasped for breath, pressing the lanyards to her chest. "But not just any tickets. VIP. Exclusive VIP. They are doing a limited meet and greet after the game. I am going to see him. I am going to breathe the same air as him. I am going to talk to my dream husband." Verona smiled softly at her friend's sheer joy, though the idea of a crowded stadium made her mentally exhausted. "That's amazing, Aurea. I'm so happy for you. You're going to have the best time." Aurea stopped bouncing. She looked at Verona, her expression shifting from euphoric to deadly serious. She crawled up the bed and grabbed both of Verona's hands. "No, we are going to have the best time." Verona froze. "What? No. No, absolutely not. I don't know the first thing about football, and I certainly don't want to stand in a line to flatter some famous athlete." "Verona, please." Aurea pleaded, her grip tightening. "You have to be by my side. If I go alone, I'll faint. I'll make a fool of myself. I need you to ground me. I need my best friend there when I meet the love of my life." Verona looked at the desperate, glowing face of the girl who had taken her in, the girl who had always treated her like royalty. She thought of her quiet cafe, her books, and her disdain for arrogant men. Then, she looked at the VIP passes. With a heavy, resigned sigh, Verona closed her book. "Fine. But I am not wearing a jersey." Saturday arrived with a bright, unapologetic glare that matched Aurea's manic energy. The penthouse was a disaster zone of discarded designer clothing, shoes, and frantic pacing. Verona, completely unfazed by the day's monumental stakes, pushed open the door to Aurea's bedroom. She was dressed with effortless practicality, a crisp white tank top layered under a comfortable denim romper, topped with a cozy, oversized yellow cardigan. She hadn't thought twice about her outfit, it was just another Saturday. Aurea, however, was currently submerged waist-deep in a mountain of silk, chiffon, and lace. "It's hopeless." Aurea groaned, emerging from the pile with a sequined halter top draped over her head. "I have nothing to wear. Verona, I need to look beautiful. Utterly, breathtakingly beautiful. He needs to look at me and see a woman of elite sophistication, not a desperate fangirl." Verona chuckled, stepping over a discarded pair of Jimmy Choos. She surveyed the chaos, her keen, organized mind quickly filtering through the options. She reached into the pile and pulled out a sweeping, emerald green maxi dress. It was elegant, cinched perfectly at the waist, and exuded a quiet, old-money wealth that didn't need sequins to scream for attention. "Wear this," Verona instructed, holding it up. "It's rich, it's classy, and it complements your skin tone perfectly. Pair it with the gold sandals, and you'll look like royalty." Aurea gasped, snatching the dress. "You are a lifesaver. An actual angel." Hours later, the quiet tranquility of the penthouse was replaced by the deafening roar of a packed football stadium. The VIP box offered a flawless view of the pitch, but to Verona, the game was a blur of running figures and incomprehensible whistling. Beside her, Aurea was vibrating with adrenaline, screaming every time Richard Park took possession of the ball. And Richard was, undeniably, brilliant. He moved with a lethal grace, striking the ball with precision that sent the crowd into absolute hysterics. The entire stadium seemed to breathe with him. Yet, amidst the cheering and the chanting, Verona sat with her chin resting in her hand, her mind blessedly blank, quietly calculating her budget for the upcoming month to pass the time. When the final whistle blew, securing a dominant victory for Richard's team, the real chaos began. The VIP ticket holders were corralled into an exclusive lounge near the locker rooms. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation as heavily built security guards formed a protective perimeter. Then, the players emerged. Among them, Richard Park was the undisputed center of gravity. But as Verona watched from the back of the throng, she noticed something peculiar. His magnetism wasn't just a byproduct of his fame or his striking, chiseled features. It was his demeanor. He possessed a genuinely warm smile, waving at the crowd and gently touching the outstretched hands of his fans with a look of deep gratitude. He didn't look like an arrogant celebrity, he looked like a man who truly appreciated the people who supported him. Move, move, move. Aurea hissed, grabbing Verona's wrist and ruthlessly weaving through the crowd. They breached the front line just as Richard made his way down the row. Aurea's breath hitched as he stopped in front of him. He offered Aurea a kind smile, reaching out to gently shake her trembling hand. Aurea was entirely speechless, her eyes wide with adoration. Verona, meanwhile, felt a dull headache forming from the noise and the crushing bodies. She lifted a hand to her temple, pressing 2 fingers against her skin, her body angled slightly away from the barrier. She just wanted to go home. Richard paused. His gaze drifted from Aurea's starry-eyed expression to the girl standing beside her. In all his years of stardom, Richard had seen every iteration of the adoring fan, the criers, the screamers, the ones who tried to grab his jersey. But he had never, not once, seen a woman who completely refused to linger on him. He had never seen a woman who actively avoided his touch, who looked so profoundly bored by his existence. Something shifted in his chest. A sudden, sharp spark of interest. This one is different, he thought. He leaned forward slightly, his deep, melodic voice cutting through the noise. Excuse me, miss. Don't you want my autograph? Verona was pulled from her thoughts. She dropped her hand from her temple and looked up, expecting to see a smug, arrogant athlete. Instead, she found herself locked into a pair of warm, impossibly bright eyes. Time seemed to stutter. For the first time in her life, a strange, undeniable flutter erupted in Verona's stomach. It was a sensation she had never felt for any man, a sudden, magnetic pull that left her momentarily stunned. She quickly composed herself, suppressing the flutter. She offered him a faint, polite smile. No, thank you, Verona said, her voice steady and calm. She gestured to the trembling girl beside her. My friend Aurea is the best fan you've got, I suppose. Talk to her. Aurea practically vibrated with joy, thrilled that her best friend was hyping her up to the man of her dreams. Before Richard could respond, a security guard tapped his shoulder. Time's up, Park. We need to head back. The players began to retreat down the tunnel. But just before he disappeared into the shadows of the locker room, Richard turned back. His eyes instantly found Verona in the crowd, and a slow, undeniable smirk spread across his handsome face. Oh my God, Aurea gasped, clutching her chest as her knees buckled. He smiled at me. Verona, he smirked at me. Aurea's eyes rolled back slightly, and she nearly fainted, collapsing heavily against Verona's yellow cardigan. Later that night, the penthouse was quiet once again. Aurea was sprawled across her silk bedsheets, staring dreamily at the ceiling, replaying the moment on an endless loop. Down the hall in her own room, Verona stood over an ironing board. She methodically pressed the creases out of her blazers and trousers for the upcoming work week, determinately pushing the memory of those bright eyes and that unexpected flutter far, far to the back of her mind. For an entire week, Richard Park could not shake the image of the girl in the yellow cardigan from his mind. It was an entirely unfamiliar sensation. He was a man accustomed to the world bending to his presence. Women usually threw themselves at him, their eyes wide with adoration or masked with calculated ambition. But she had stood in the presence of a global icon and looked as though she'd rather be balancing a checkbook. Her outright refusal of his autograph profoundly disturbed his usual equilibrium, but in the most intoxicating way. His mind was filled with amusement and an insatiable curiosity about the girl who had pressed her fingers to her temples as if his very existence was a migraine. He wanted to know the girl behind that polite, indifferent mask. He wanted to talk to her, to hear the calm, steady voice that had so effortlessly dismissed him in favor of her fainting friend. Exactly 7 days after the match, the city was draped in the bruised purple hues of early evening. Verona was walking down the bustling pavement, feeling utterly devastated by a grueling day of overwork. The corporate world was unforgiving, and her new role as human resources manager had tested every ounce of her patience. Her feet ached in her sensible heels, and her only comfort was the lukewarm coffee sloshing in the plastic cup she gripped in her tired hand. As she watched the endless stream of occupied taxis blur past, she closed her eyes for a brief second, desperately wishing for a ride home. Just a few feet away, gliding through the evening traffic, a sleek, black Maybach purred down the avenue. In the back seat, Richard was absent-mindedly watching the city roll by when his eyes locked onto a familiar figure on the sidewalk. She wasn't wearing denim and yellow today, but a sharp, tailored office skirt and a simple blouse. Yet, he recognized her posture instantly, grounded, practical, and unmistakably her. He watched her navigate the crowded sidewalk, clutching her plastic cup, looking exhausted but fiercely resilient. "She's an independent woman," Richard muttered to himself, a soft smile playing on his lips. He leaned forward, tapping the partition. "Pull over right here, please." Verona was just calculating the walking distance to the nearest subway station when a massive, impossibly sleek black Maybach glided to a smooth halt precisely at her feet. She stepped back, shocked by the sheer proximity of the luxury vehicle, her heart doing a nervous stutter. The tinted window slowly hummed down. Verona froze. The street noise seemed to fade into a dull hum as she found herself staring directly into those same, impossibly bright eyes that had haunted the back of her mind for a week. Richard rested his arm casually on the window frame, his handsome face breaking into a warm, genuine smile. "Hello, miss," his deep voice drifted into the cool evening air. "Do you remember me?" "The football player, we have met last Saturday." Verona's breath hitched in her throat. Her grip on the plastic cup tightened as a shockwave rippled through her exhausted body. He remembered. Out of all the thousands of screaming fans, all the VIPs, and all the flashing cameras, this world-famous man had remembered the face of the one girl who hadn't cared. She stared at him, the arrogant athlete stereotype she held so firmly in her mind beginning to crack. For a man of his stature to stop his car in the middle of evening traffic just to say hello to a stranger. That, Verona thought, her pulse racing in a way that had nothing to do with her coffee, was quite unique. Verona stared at the luxurious leather interior of the Maybach, then back at the world-famous athlete smiling warmly at her from the back seat. The flutter in her stomach returned, but her sensible, fiercely independent mind quickly overrode it. "I remember you, Mr. Park," Verona said, adjusting her grip on her lukewarm coffee. "But I'm fine, thank you. The subway station is just a few blocks away. I wouldn't want to intrude." Richard's smile didn't falter, if anything, it grew more amused. He leaned a little closer to the window. "Miss, you look like you're about to fall over, and your coffee is definitely cold. Please. I insist. The streets are busy, and it would be my pleasure to ensure you get home safely." Verona hesitated. Her feet were screaming in agony, and the thought of standing on a crowded subway car suddenly felt like an impossible mountain to climb. She looked at Richard's eyes, there was no arrogance there, no expectation. Just genuine, simple kindness. With a resigned sigh that felt entirely out of character, she nodded. "All right. But just this once." The driver stepped out instantly, opening the heavy door for her. Verona slid into the back, enveloped by the scent of rich leather and a subtle, clean cologne. At first, the air in the cabin was thick with an awkward tension. Verona sat rigidly, acutely aware of the vast difference between her world and his. She expected him to boast about his latest victory or check his phone incessantly, like the self-absorbed men she despised. Instead, Richard turned his full attention to her. "So, you never gave me your name." "Verona," she said softly. Verona, he tested the syllables, nodding approvingly. And what does Verona do that leaves her looking so exhausted on a Tuesday evening? To her surprise, the conversation flowed with an effortless rhythm. Richard didn't want to talk about football, wealth, or fame. He wanted to know about her transition from the countryside to the corporate world, her struggles as a new HR manager, and the book she read at the little cafe. In return, she saw glimpses of the man beneath the jersey. He was witty, remarkably observant, and grounded in a reality she hadn't expected from a billionaire athlete. When the sleek car finally pulled up to the curb outside Aurea's sprawling penthouse building, Verona felt a strange pang of disappointment that the ride was over. She turned to him, offering a genuine, unguarded smile. "Thank you, Richard. I appreciate the ride more than you know." "Anytime, Verona," he replied softly, holding her gaze a second longer than necessary. As she walked into the lobby, her heart beating a completely new rhythm, she didn't know it yet, but it was the day everything changed. That just this once ride quickly transformed into an unspoken, magnetic routine. Whenever Richard didn't have late afternoon practices or away matches, the black Maybach would be waiting just down the block from Verona's office building. What started as a polite favor morphed into the highlight of Verona's day. The backseat of the car became a sanctuary where the pressures of the corporate world and the blinding lights of his stardom faded away. They talked about everything. Richard confessed his deep-seated fear of failing the charities he funded, the crushing weight of public expectations, and his quiet hobby of collecting vintage vinyl records. Verona shared her fierce ambition to provide for her parents, her distaste for the superficiality of the city, and her love for historical fiction. She began to see the profound, beautiful humanity that the tabloids praised him for. He wasn't just kind, he was deeply empathetic, listening to her with a focus that made her feel like the only person in the world. But with every laugh they shared and every lingering glance, a heavy, suffocating shadow loomed over Verona's heart. Aurea. Aurea, the girl who had shared her childhood. The girl who had opened her penthouse to a country girl without a second thought. The girl who loved Richard Park with a desperate, blinding obsession. Every evening Verona returned home, her skin humming from Richard's proximity, she was greeted by Aurea's relentless scheming. Aurea would be sprawled on the living room rug, laptops and magazines scattered around her, furiously researching charity galas and exclusive club openings just to find a new way to get closer to Richard. "Tell her," Verona's conscience screamed every single night. "Tell her he gave you a ride. Tell her you're friends now." But the words always died in her throat. How could she explain it? How could she tell her best friend that the man Aurea had worshipped from afar for years was willingly seeking out the company of the girl who had refused his autograph? The guilt gnawed at her, turning her stomach into knots. She was trapped between the terrifying, beautiful feelings blossoming in her chest for Richard, and the soul-crushing betrayal she felt she was committing against her best friend with every secret ride home. The air that evening was thick and humid, heavy with the promise of a breaking storm. When the sleek black Maybach pulled up to the curb of Aurea's building, Verona lingered in the back seat for a moment longer than usual. She exchanged a warm smile with Richard, thanking him for another safe ride and the effortless conversation that had become the anchor of her chaotic days. She stepped out onto the pavement, closing the heavy door gently. As the luxury car glided away, melting into the evening traffic, Verona turned toward the lobby. Her heart stopped. Standing beneath the awning, illuminated by the harsh glow of the street lamps, was Aurea. She wasn't wearing her usual vibrant smile or designer sunglasses. Her eyes were fixed on the disappearing taillights of the Maybach, her face drained of all color. As a superfan who tracked Richard's every move, Aurea knew the license plate of his private vehicle by heart. She knew exactly whose car her best friend had just stepped out of. "Aurea." Verona started, her voice trembling as panic seized her throat. Aurea didn't speak immediately. The silence between them was deafening, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. When Aurea finally looked at Verona, her eyes were burning with a dark, unfamiliar fury. "How long?" Aurea whispered, her voice shaking. "Aurea, please, let me explain." "How long, Verona?" Aurea screamed, the sound echoing sharply down the street. While I was inside, planning my entire life around him, crying over him, you were in his car? You were lying to me every single day? I didn't mean to, Verona pleaded, tears instantly blurring her vision as she took a step forward. It just happened. He offered me a ride, and I was so scared to tell you because I knew how much it would hurt. Smack. The sound of the slap was sharp and sudden. Verona stumbled back, her hand flying to her stinging cheek. The physical pain was nothing compared to the absolute devastation radiating from Aurea's eyes. You betrayed me, Aurea hissed, her voice dripping with venom and heartbreak. I gave you a home. I gave you everything. And you took the one thing in this world I wanted. Get out. I never want to see your face again. Before Verona could utter another word, Aurea spun on her heel and disappeared into the lobby, instructing the doorman not to let Verona inside. 10 minutes later, the sky broke. The storm unleashed a torrential downpour, soaking Verona to the bone as she wandered the unfamiliar city streets with nothing but her purse. She had nowhere to go. By midnight, shivering and exhausted, she found a cheap, dimly lit motel on the edge of the district. Collapsing onto the sagging bed, Verona finally let out a gut-wrenching sob. She cried for the warmth of the Maybach, she cried for her own cowardice, but most of all, she wept with a bitter, consuming hatred for herself because she had broken the heart of her best friend. The next 4 days were a suffocating blur of misery for Verona. She managed to buy a few cheap sets of clothes to get through her workdays, but she was a ghost of her former self. Every spare second was spent dialing Aurea's number. Every call went straight to voicemail. The silence from her best friend was a punishment worse than the slap. Across the city, a different kind of quiet desperation was taking root. At 5:30 p.m., Richard sat in the back seat of the Maybach, parked down the block from Verona's office. He watched the doors. Hundreds of people poured out, but none of them wore practical cardigans, and none of them walked with Verona's grounded, determined stride. He had waited the first day, assuming she was working late. By the second day, a knot of worry had formed in his chest. Now, on the 4th day, the realization hit him with the force of a physical blow: she was gone. Richard cursed himself, running a frustrated hand through his dark hair. He had intentionally never asked for her phone number. He hadn't wanted to overwhelm her, terrified that pushing too hard would scare away the only woman who treated him like a normal human being. He cherished the fact that she didn't care about his fame or his face, she only cared about the way they laughed together, the way he listened to her. As he stared at the empty pavement, the truth settled heavily in his heart. He hadn't just enjoyed her company. He had, quietly and irrevocably, fallen for her. The gap she left in his life was a cavern. He couldn't focus on practice, he couldn't sleep. He needed to know she was safe. With renewed determination, he tapped the partition. Take me to the address we usually drop her off at, Richard instructed his driver. If he couldn't call her, he would have to find her himself. The sprawling penthouse, usually a sanctuary of high fashion and loud music, felt like a tomb. Aurea lay drowned in the cushions of her massive velvet sofa. She wore no makeup, her hair was a tangled mess, and she wore a faded oversized t-shirt. She looked like a woman who had lost her anchor. She was grieving the loss of her best friend, but underneath the sorrow festered a toxic, blinding envy. She hated Verona. She hated her for going to that match, for being the one Richard noticed, and for carelessly holding the heart of the man Aurea had sworn to love forever. Aurea was so utterly consumed by her obsession with Richard that she had refused to date any other man, saving herself for a fantasy that had now been stolen by her closest confidant. When the sharp buzz of the penthouse intercom echoed through the room, Aurea ignored it. But the doorman's voice came through a moment later, hesitant and shocked. Miss Aurea. Mr. Richard Park is here to see a Miss Verona. Shall I send him up? Aurea stopped breathing. She scrambled off the sofa, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't change her clothes or fix her face, she was frozen in a state of surreal disbelief as she opened the front door. And there he was. The man of her wildest, most desperate dreams, standing on her doorstep. But looking into his eyes, Aurea felt a fresh wave of agony wash over her. He wasn't looking at her with admiration or interest. His handsome face was tight with worry, his bright eyes scanning the hallway behind her. He was looking for her. "I'm incredibly sorry to intrude," Richard said, his voice polite but strained. "I'm looking for Verona. I haven't seen her in days, and I wanted to make sure she was all right." Hearing him say Verona's name made Aurea want to scream. Tears pricked her eyes, her breath shaking as she gripped the doorframe to keep from collapsing. The sheer unfairness of it tore at her soul. "She is no longer here, Richard," Aurea said, her voice brittle. "She left. I don't know where she lives." Richard's face fell, a shadow of genuine distress passing over his features. "I see. Do you happen to have her phone number? I realize I never asked her for it." Aurea stared at the man she worshipped. A dark, possessive instinct coiled tightly around her heart. She was not going to let Verona win. She was not going to let her rival have the happy ending Aurea felt she deserved. A cruel, subtle smirk ghosted across Aurea's lips, hidden by the shadows of the hallway. "Her phone is broken," Aurea lied, her voice dropping to a sympathetic whisper. "She got caught in this storm a few nights ago and it was destroyed. She hasn't gotten a new one yet." Richard sighed, looking utterly defeated. "Thank you. If she comes back, please tell her I came by." "Wait," Aurea blurted out as he turned to leave. Her obsession flared, bold and desperate. She stepped out of the doorway. "If I hear from her, or if she comes back to get her things, I should let you know immediately. Can I have your personal number? Just to keep you updated." Richard hesitated, entirely unaware of the trap closing around him. All he could think about was finding the girl with the yellow cardigan. "Of course," he said, pulling a sleek pen from his jacket and writing his private number on a piece of paper from his pocket. He handed it to Aurea. "Please, call me the second you hear from her." Aurea took the paper, her fingers brushing his. "I promise." The piece of paper bearing Richard's private number became Aurea's most prized possession. It was her golden ticket, and she wasted no time cashing it in. The calls began the very next morning. Under the guise of a concerned friend, Aurea would dial his number, her voice perfectly pitched to convey distress. She spun a web of elaborate lies. "Richard, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she left the city," she would say one day. "She called me from a blocked number and said she just wants to be left alone," she would lie on another. But phone calls were not enough to satisfy Aurea's obsession. She needed to be in his presence. She began dropping by his luxury penthouse, always unannounced, always armed with a fabricated update about Verona. Every visit was a calculated performance. Aurea wore breathtaking, form-fitting designer dresses, her hair styled to perfection, smelling of expensive perfume. She would sit on his plush leather sofas, crossing her long legs, playing the role of the beautiful, comforting confidante. She poured him drinks, laughed at things that weren't funny, and constantly attempted to steer the conversation away from the missing girl and toward herself. However, Richard was not a fool. At first, he appreciated her updates, desperate for any news of the woman with the yellow cardigan. But as the days turned into a week, a cold, unsettling realization began to dawn on him. Aurea's behavior deeply contradicted her words. She claimed to be devastated by the loss of her best friend, yet she showed up at his door in haute couture, radiating a triumphant joy. When she spoke of Verona, her eyes lacked empathy, instead, they glittered with a strange, possessive victory. She never once suggested hiring a private investigator or putting up flyers. She was far too happy playing house in his penthouse. One evening, after Aurea had left his apartment in a cloud of Chanel perfume, Richard sat alone in the quiet of his living room. His jaw clenched. He was done playing games. He picked up his phone and dialed his most trusted personal assistant. "I need you to find someone," Richard instructed, his voice low and commanding. "Her name is Verona. She used to work as an HR manager downtown. Put every resource we have into finding out where she went. And keep it strictly confidential." On the other side of the city, Verona was barely a ghost of the vibrant, determined woman she had once been. The fallout from losing Aurea had shattered her entirely. Unable to focus, unable to eat, and unable to sleep, her performance at the corporate conglomerate had plummeted. Within 2 weeks, she had been gently but firmly let go. She hadn't fought it. She felt almost dead inside, wandering through the motions of life in a heavy, suffocating fog. She knew absolutely nothing of Aurea's deceit or Richard's desperate search. All she knew was the crushing weight of her own heart. Despite her best efforts to suppress it, the truth was undeniable: she had fallen deeply, irrevocably in love with the kind, handsome Korean football player. She missed his laugh. She missed the safe haven of his Maybach. She missed the man beneath the jersey who made her feel like she truly mattered in a world so large and unforgiving. One bleak Tuesday afternoon, Verona found herself walking aimlessly down a busy commercial pavement. Her bank account was dwindling, and the thought of her hard-working parents in the countryside pierced through her depression. They had sacrificed everything for her education. She could not fail them. She needed to survive. She needed a job, immediately. As she stood at a crosswalk, lost in her anxious thoughts, the roar of a high-performance engine cut through the city noise. A sleek, black sports car slowed to a halt at the red light just a few feet away from her. The windows were down, letting the crisp breeze in. Verona's breath hitched, her blood turning to ice. In the driver's seat sat Richard, his profile as impossibly handsome as she remembered, looking straight ahead at the traffic light. And in the passenger seat, laughing brightly with her head thrown back, was Aurea. Verona stepped back into the shadows of the crowd, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. An unspoken, agonizing pain spread through every fiber of her being. She squeezed her eyes shut as the light turned green and the sports car sped away. It's for the best, Verona told herself, forcing a single tear away. She got what she wanted. They are together now. I should be happy for her. With a renewed, desperate strength born from absolute heartbreak, Verona marched straight to the nearest public library to print her resumes. She was a talented, brilliant woman, and she would not let her parents down. Over the next 3 days, she poured her soul into applications and interviews. Her sharp intellect and raw dedication shone through her sorrow, landing her a high-level administrative and HR position at a prestigious sports marketing firm. It was exactly what she needed to get back on her feet. It was a fresh start. What Verona did not know, as she signed her new employment contract with a small, hopeful smile, was that the marketing firm had only one major, exclusive client. She had just been hired to manage the internal operations for the brand management team of Richard Park. The sprawling glass-walled boardroom on the 40th floor offered a breathtaking view of the city, but Verona's eyes were locked on the meticulously organized slides displayed on the massive screen. It was only her second day at the sports marketing firm, yet her fierce intellect had already pushed her to the forefront of a major campaign overhaul. She adjusted her blazer, took a deep breath, and waited for the firm's exclusive client and his management team to arrive. At precisely 10 a.m., the heavy oak doors swung open. A team of agents and PR executives filed in, but it was the man walking at the center of the entourage who drained the air from Verona's lungs. Richard Park stepped into the room, looking sharp in a tailored charcoal suit. As he took his seat at the head of the long mahogany table, his eyes casually swept across the room, and then stopped dead. The shock that registered on his face was immediate and profound. His posture stiffened, his bright eyes widening as they locked onto Verona standing at the podium. For a breathless, agonizing second, the rest of the room vanished for both of them. Verona felt her heart hammer violently against her ribs, the familiar flutter returning with a vengeance. The man she had been trying to erase from her mind was sitting less than 10 feet away. But Verona was a survivor. Pushing down the tidal wave of emotion, she gripped the edges of the podium, lifted her chin, and forced herself into the role of the consummate professional. "Good morning," Verona began, her voice steady and clear despite the storm raging inside her. "Today, we are looking at a complete pivot in Mr. Park's brand strategy." Richard didn't blink. He sat entirely mesmerized as the woman he had spent weeks desperately searching for commanded the room. Verona clicked to the next slide. The sports industry is saturated with false fantasies, tailored drama, and unreachable idolization. The public is exhausted by it. What makes Mr. Park entirely unique is not just his undeniable skill on the pitch, but his profound humanity. She spoke passionately, drawing on the very things she had learned about him in the backseat of the Maybach. We must highlight a player's personal qualities without fabricating a persona. We don't need to build a god, we need to showcase the man. By improvising and emphasizing Mr. Park's natural, genuine care for his fans and his charitable integrity, we create a legacy built on authenticity, not just fame. When she finished, the room sat in stunned silence for a moment before the lead PR executive began to clap. Soon, the entire board joined in. They were entirely impressed by her grounded, brilliant approach. Throughout it all, Richard never took his eyes off her, his heart swelling with a mixture of overwhelming relief and deep, undeniable awe. As the meeting adjourned, the executives packed up their briefcases and filed out of the glass doors, animatedly discussing the new strategy. Verona immediately busied herself with gathering her notes, her hands shaking slightly as she avoided looking at the head of the table. She just wanted to escape. But as the door clicked shut behind the last executive, the heavy silence of the empty boardroom settled over them. Richard rose from his chair and slowly closed the distance between them. "Verona," he breathed, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. She snapped her laptop shut and finally looked at him. He looked exhausted, yet there was a brilliant, relieved light shining in his eyes. "Mr. Park," she replied politely, stepping back to maintain a professional barrier. She forced a bright, fragile smile onto her face. "It's good to see you. I actually saw you driving the other day. I wanted to congratulate you." Richard stopped, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "Congratulate me? For what?" "For you and Aurea," Verona said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "I saw you both in your car. I know she's loved you for a very long time. I'm truly happy that you found each other." Richard's confusion morphed into a sharp, sudden realization of the web Aurea had spun. The lies, the unannounced visits, the fabricated stories about Verona wanting to be left alone, it all clicked into place in a sickening rush. He didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, bridging the gap she had tried to create, and gently took both of her trembling hands in his. His grip was warm, anchoring her to the spot. "Verona," Richard said softly, his bright eyes locking onto hers with a fierce, unreadable intensity. "Aurea was never the person I want to date." Verona froze, her breath catching in her throat as his thumb gently stroked the back of her hand. "It was always you," he confessed, his voice breaking slightly. "From the moment you refused to look at me, from every ride we shared, to right now. It has only ever been you. I have been tearing this city apart trying to find you." The walls Verona had so painstakingly built over the last few weeks shattered completely. Hot tears spilled over her lashes, tracking down her cheeks. To hear the man she had fallen so deeply for say those words was a beautiful, agonizing torture. Because it changed nothing. "I can't," Verona sobbed, gently but firmly pulling her hands out of his grasp. She stepped back, shaking her head. "I can't, Richard. Even if what you say is true, she was my best friend. She gave me a home. She loves you in a way I could never compete with. If I accept this, if I accept you, I am betraying her all over again. Verona, please." "Goodbye, Richard," she whispered, grabbing her bag and turning on her heel. She practically ran from the boardroom, leaving a piece of her soul behind with him. Richard stood entirely alone in the massive glass room, watching the door she had just disappeared through. His chest heaved with a mixture of heartbreak and newfound determination. He knew the truth now, and he wasn't going to let her slip away a second time. Before he could take a step to follow her, the silence of the room was pierced by the sharp ringing of his phone. He pulled it from his pocket, staring at the caller ID. It was his lead assistant. He answered, pressing the phone to his ear. "Sir," the assistant's voice came through, brisk and serious. I have the information you requested regarding Miss Verona's disappearance, and I think you need to hear exactly what Miss Aurea has been doing. Go ahead, Richard said, his voice tight, gripping the phone as he looked out over the sprawling city from the boardroom window. His assistant's voice was crisp and clinical, but the words were a series of heavy blows. Sir, we tracked down the building staff at Miss Aurea's penthouse. According to the doorman on duty that night, there was a violent altercation on the pavement. Miss Aurea confronted Miss Verona right after you dropped her off. The doorman witnessed Miss Aurea strike her across the face and explicitly forbid her from re-entering the building. Miss Verona was cast out into the storm with nothing but her handbag. Richard's blood ran cold. The image of Verona, gentle, hard-working Verona, standing in the torrential rain, slapped and homeless, made a blinding rage flare in his chest. Furthermore, the assistant continued, Miss Aurea's claims about a broken phone and Miss Verona leaving the city were entirely fabricated. Miss Verona stayed in a low-budget motel before finding a small apartment in the suburbs. Richard hung up the phone, the silence of the boardroom suddenly feeling oppressive. His knuckles were white. The betrayal ran so much deeper than he had imagined. Aurea hadn't just lied to him to get his attention, she had actively, maliciously destroyed the life of the girl she called her best friend. She had manipulated him, treating him like a prize to be won rather than a man who could make his own choices. Love cannot be forced, Richard thought, his anger settling into a cold, hard resolve. Aurea's obsession was not love, it was a cage. His first instinct was to drive straight to the penthouse and demand answers, to unleash the fury boiling inside him. But as he looked at the door Verona had just walked through, he stopped himself. Confronting Aurea privately wouldn't fix the damage done to Verona's heart. Verona still believed Aurea was a victim of her betrayal. She still carried the crushing guilt of a crime she didn't commit. Richard didn't just want to confront Aurea. He needed the truth laid bare. He needed to hear the venom and the lies come straight from Aurea's mouth, right in front of Verona. He would wait for the perfect moment to spring the trap. But until then, he had a heart to mend. Despite her dramatic exit from the boardroom, Verona could not escape Richard Park. As the exclusive client of her new marketing firm, his presence was a constant. But Richard didn't use their professional proximity to force a grand romance, instead, he used it to simply be there. He started showing up at her small, cubicle-adjacent desk with 2 cups of coffee from the little reading cafe she loved. When she worked late, a sleek black car would be waiting downstairs, not to whisk her away on a glamorous date, but simply to ensure she got home safely, just like before. At first, Verona felt incredibly awkward. She tried to keep her distance, terrified of the guilt that still haunted her. Richard, you shouldn't be here, she would say, her eyes darting away from his intense, warm gaze. What about Aurea? I am not with Aurea, he would reply calmly, never pushing, never raising his voice. I am just here to make sure my favorite marketing strategist doesn't collapse from exhaustion. Slowly, the ice began to melt. Richard saw the deep, lingering sadness in her eyes, a grief not just for the chaos of the past few weeks, but for the profound loss of her best friend. He didn't belittle her pain. He listened as she talked about her childhood with Aurea, offering a quiet, steadfast comfort that grounded her. He was incredibly patient. He wanted to know, without a shadow of a doubt, if the spark he felt between them was real, or if she was just caught in the crossfire of his fame. As the days turned into weeks, Verona found her walls crumbling. It was impossible to stay away. She found herself lingering in his presence, her heart doing that familiar flutter every time he smiled that genuine, breathtaking smile. She realized that the man sitting across from her with a cardboard coffee cup was the same man she had fallen for in the back of the Maybach. The guilt that had suffocated her began to ease, replaced by the undeniable reality of his kindness. He wasn't a fantasy, and he wasn't Aurea's property. He was just Richard. And as they sat together in the quiet twilight of his car one evening, laughing over a ridiculous tabloid headline, Verona finally allowed herself to feel the love she had so desperately tried to bury. The interior of the Maybach was bathed in the soft, amber glow of passing streetlights. Verona and Richard were huddled in the back seat, a ridiculous sports tabloid spread open between them. The headline blared, "Richard Park secretly purchases private island for mystery lover," accompanied by a grainy, heavily zoomed-in photo of Richard merely buying a cup of coffee. Verona's laughter echoed through the quiet cabin, bright and genuine. "An island, Richard? Really? And here I was thinking you were just buying me a cappuccino." Richard chuckled, shaking his head as he tossed the magazine onto the opposite seat. "If I bought an island, I certainly wouldn't be caught doing it in sweatpants. The media's imagination never ceases to amaze me." As the laughter slowly faded, a sudden, heavy silence settled over the car. But it wasn't the awkward tension of their early rides, it was a charged, breathable quiet. The humor drained from Verona's face, replaced by a soft, vulnerable sincerity. She looked down at her hands, tracing the seam of her trousers, before finally lifting her eyes to meet his. "Richard," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. He shifted, giving her his full attention, the amusement in his eyes softening into deep affection. "I'm listening." I need to tell you something," Verona said, her heart hammering against her ribs, no longer out of fear, but out of an overwhelming, undeniable truth. "I've been lying to myself for months. Since the very beginning, actually." Richard didn't push, he just waited, giving her the safe space she needed. "When Aurea dragged me to that VIP meet and greet, I was determined to hate you," Verona confessed, a shaky breath escaping her lips. "I thought you were just another arrogant, self-absorbed athlete. But when you stopped in front of me, when you asked if I wanted an autograph and looked at me with those bright eyes, all my defenses just crumbled. I tried so hard to build them back up, but every time I got into this car with you, every time you asked me about my day, every time you showed me how deeply you care for the world, I just melted." A tear slipped free, rolling down her cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. "I buried it because of Aurea. I buried it because I felt so guilty. But I can't hide it anymore. I love you, Richard. I love the man beneath the jersey. I think I always have." Richard's breath hitched. For a moment, the world outside the tinted windows ceased to exist. He reached out, his large, warm hands gently cupping her face. His thumb softly wiped away the lone tear on her cheek, his touch sending a shockwave of warmth straight to her soul. "Verona," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion so profound it made her shiver. He leaned in, closing the final inch between them, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was everything she had secretly dreamed of in the quiet hours of the night, soft, tender, yet filled with a fierce, burning passion that communicated weeks of unspoken longing. Verona melted completely into his touch, her hands finding their way into his dark hair as she kissed him back, pouring every ounce of her buried love into the moment. The walls she had built around her heart finally shattered into dust. When they slowly pulled apart, both breathless, Verona didn't pull away. Instead, she let her head fall forward, resting her cheek against the solid warmth of his chest. She wrapped her arms tightly around his torso, holding him as if she were afraid he might disappear into the night. Beneath her ear, she could hear the steady, strong rhythm of his heartbeat. Richard wrapped his arms around her securely, burying his face in her hair. He kissed the top of her head, pulling her even closer. "I'm never letting you go," Richard whispered fiercely into the quiet cabin, his voice vibrating against her cheek. "I promise you, Verona. The fame, the noise, the drama, none of it matters. My love for you will never fade, and I am never leaving your side. Forever." The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Richard's penthouse, casting a golden hue over the sleek modern furniture. Despite the warmth of the previous night's confession, a lingering shadow remained in Verona's eyes. Richard saw it clearly over their morning coffee. It was the guilt, the heavy, unearned burden she still carried regarding her former best friend. Richard knew that his words alone wouldn't be enough to completely erase the ghost of Aurea from their relationship. He needed Verona to see the undeniable truth. He needed her to understand that she hadn't destroyed a friendship, Aurea had. Setting his coffee cup down on the marble island, Richard took Verona's hands in his. "Verona, there is something I haven't told you." My assistant looked into what happened the night you left Aurea's building. Verona tensed, her gaze dropping to the floor. Richard, I don't want to talk about it. It hurts too much. You need to hear this, he insisted gently, lifting her chin so she was forced to look at him. I know she slapped you. I know she threw you out into the storm. But what you don't know is that she has been coming here, to this very penthouse, spinning lies about you. She told me your phone was broken, that you left the city, and that you wanted to be left alone. Verona's breath hitched, her eyes widening in disbelief. What? Why would she do that? To isolate you. To make sure I never found you, Richard said, his voice hardening with a protective edge. I need you to be entirely clear on the fact that I have absolutely no feelings for her, and I never did. But more importantly, I need you to free yourself from this guilt. I want to lay a trap, and I need you to be here for it. After a long moment of hesitation, Verona nodded slowly. It was time to face the storm. Later that evening, the trap was set. Verona sat quietly in the darkened library adjacent to the main living area. The heavy double doors were left slightly ajar, providing her with a clear line of sight and sound to the plush velvet sofas in the center of the room. Her heart hammered nervously against her ribs, but Richard's reassuring kiss on her forehead before he stepped out into the living room gave her the strength she needed. At exactly 7 p.m., the private elevator chimed. Aurea stepped into the penthouse looking like a vision of high society. She wore a striking, crimson silk dress that clung to her figure, her hair cascading in perfect, glossy waves. She carried a bottle of expensive champagne, a triumphant, predatory smile painted on her lips. In her mind, this was the night she finally claimed her prize. Richard, darling, Aurea purred, gliding across the room and placing the champagne on the glass coffee table. You sounded so serious on the phone. I came as quickly as I could. Richard stood near the fireplace, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. He didn't offer her a drink, nor did he return her smile. His expression was a mask of cold, unreadable calm. Thank you for coming, Aurea, Richard said, his deep voice echoing in the cavernous room. I wanted to have a truthful conversation with you. Aurea settled onto the sofa, elegantly crossing her legs. Of course. You can tell me anything. You know I'm always here for you. It's about Verona, Richard stated flatly. Aurea's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered, adopting a look of practiced pity. Oh, Richard. I know you were worried about her, but we have to let her go. She made her choices. She betrayed us both. Did she? Richard took a slow step forward. Because the doorman at your building remembers things a bit differently. He remembers you striking her. He remembers you throwing her out into a torrential downpour with nothing but her purse. Aurea froze. The color drained from her perfectly contoured face. She blinked, her mind racing to formulate a new lie, but Richard didn't give her the chance. You came to my home, drank my wine, and looked me in the eye while telling me she had left the city. Richard's voice dropped to a low, dangerous register. You lied to me every single day. Why? Seeing that the facade was shattered, the pity in Aurea's eyes vanished, replaced by a dark, ugly resentment. The sophisticated mask slipped completely. Because she deserved it. Aurea snapped, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. She stood up, her fists clenched at her sides. She took everything from me. She knew how much I loved you. I worshipped the ground you walked on for years, and she just swooped in and fluttered her eyelashes at you. She was a nobody, Richard. A charity case I let live in my house, and she tried to steal my future. She never tried to steal anything, Richard countered coldly. I pursued her. It doesn't matter. Aurea screamed, tears of absolute fury spilling down her cheeks. I got rid of her so we could be together. I protected you from a manipulative liar. I did what I had to do so you would finally look at me. In the shadows of the library, Verona covered her mouth with her hands to stifle a sob. The sheer malice in Aurea's voice was unrecognizable from the girl she had grown up with in the countryside. The guilt that had weighed Verona down for months evaporated, replaced by a chilling clarity. Richard stared at Aurea with absolute disgust. "You don't love me, Aurea. You love the idea of possessing me. And as for the woman you call a nobody." Richard turned toward the slightly open doors of the library. "You can come out now, Verona." Aurea spun around, her breath catching in her throat as the heavy wooden door creaked open. Verona stepped out into the light of the living room, her posture straight, her eyes dry and filled with a quiet, unshakable strength. The trap had been sprung, and the truth was finally out in the open. Verona stood in the center of the lavish living room, looking at the woman she had once called her sister. The silence in the penthouse was thick and suffocating. Aurea's face, previously twisted in rage, now mirrored absolute shock as Verona emerged from the shadows of the library. The heartbreak in Verona's chest was heavy, not because of the man standing beside her, but because of the venomous intentions of her oldest friend. She looked at Aurea, remembering the countless times they had shared their dreams in the countryside. She remembered sharing her modest meals, holding Aurea's hand through her teenage anxieties, and offering her unwavering loyalty despite the massive gap in their wealth. "Loving someone is natural, Aurea," Verona said, her voice remarkably steady, though tears pricked the corners of her eyes. "But doing whatever it takes to force another person to fall for you, destroying anyone in your path to get it, that isn't love. That is possession. You didn't care about Richard's happiness, you only cared about owning him." Aurea's shock quickly dissolved back into a ferocious, defensive pride. She sneered, stepping closer. "Don't lecture me on love. You took advantage of my hospitality to sneak behind my back. You owe me everything, Verona. You are nothing without me. I owe you my gratitude for the roof over my head, and I would have paid you back every single cent," Verona replied, her tone resolute. "But I do not owe you my life, and I do not owe you my dignity. This friendship, it's over, Aurea. I can't be part of your life anymore." The finality in Verona's words snapped the last thread of Aurea's self-control. Blinded by a toxic cocktail of rejection, humiliation, and possessive rage, Aurea lunged forward, raising her hand to strike Verona across the face just as she had done in the rain weeks ago. But the blow never landed. Before Aurea's hand could make contact, Richard moved with lightning speed. He caught Aurea's wrist mid-air, his grip firm and immovable like iron. His bright eyes had darkened into a fierce, protective storm. "Don't you ever try to touch her again," Richard warned, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that echoed off the glass walls. He shoved Aurea's hand away with a definitive snap of his wrist, stepping squarely in front of Verona to shield her. "Stay out of her life, Aurea. If you ever come near Verona again, or if you ever spread another lie about her, you will find out exactly how much power I have in this city. Get out." Trembling with a mix of fear and absolute fury, Aurea looked between the imposing figure of the global icon she had worshipped and the quiet strength of the friend she had cast aside. Realizing she had lost entirely, Aurea grabbed her purse and stormed toward the private elevator. The doors slid shut, taking the toxic remnants of the past with her. As the quiet of the penthouse returned, the adrenaline drained from Verona's body. Her shoulders slumped, and a single tear traced down her cheek. Without a word, Richard turned and pulled her into a deep, secure hug. He wrapped his arms around her tightly, resting his chin on the top of her head. Verona buried her face in his chest, letting the last of her sorrow wash away in the absolute safety of his embrace. 2 weeks passed, and the lingering sadness over the loss of her venomous friend slowly began to fade from Verona's heart. The space Aurea had occupied was swiftly filled by the warm, constant presence of Richard Park. Despite his grueling schedule of practices, matches, and press tours, Richard made sure he was there for her. He showed up at her office with lunch, drove her home in the evenings, and spent his quiet weekends helping her decorate her small suburban apartment. Free from secrets and guilt, their relationship blossomed, growing stronger and more rooted with every passing day. Their professional lives intertwined just as seamlessly. Verona's marketing campaign, focusing on Richard's genuine humanity and charitable heart, was a massive success. The public adored the authentic version of the athlete, and the board was thrilled with Verona's brilliant strategy. To celebrate the campaign's launch, the marketing firm organized a massive fan appreciation event at the city's main football stadium. The stands were packed with thousands of cheering fans, the energy electric. Verona stood near the edge of the pitch, wearing a simple, elegant blazer, a clipboard pressed to her chest as she watched the event unfold perfectly. Suddenly, the stadium announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Park has a few words he would like to share." The crowd erupted into a deafening roar as Richard took the microphone at the center of the pitch. But instead of addressing the stands, he turned his body entirely toward the sidelines. He looked directly at Verona. The massive digital screens above the stadium immediately cut to a live feed of Verona's confused face. "I have spent my life in the spotlight, chased by cameras and surrounded by noise," Richard's deep voice echoed through the stadium, instantly quieting the crowd. "But for a long time, I felt completely unseen. Until I met a woman who didn't care about my name, my fame, or the game I play. She only cared about who I was when the stadium lights went out." Verona's breath hitched. Her heart began to hammer a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Richard began walking across the pristine green grass, straight toward her. The cameras followed his every step. He didn't want there to be any whispers, any misunderstandings, or any tabloid rumors about other women. He wanted the entire world to know exactly who owned his heart. He stopped a few feet in front of her, handed the microphone to a stunned staff member, and then, in front of 70,000 screaming fans, Richard Park dropped to one knee. A collective gasp echoed through the stadium. Verona dropped her clipboard. It clattered against the turf, completely forgotten. Richard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, flipping it open to reveal a stunning, elegant diamond ring. He looked up at her, his bright eyes shining with an overwhelming, undeniable devotion. "Verona," he said, his voice carrying over the gentle breeze. "You are my peace, my best friend, and my greatest truth. Will you be my wife? Will you be my partner, forever?" The pain of her past, the struggles of her journey, and the absolute beauty of this moment collided in Verona's chest. Tears of pure, released joy spilled over her lashes. She clamped both hands over her mouth, her shoulders shaking as she looked down at the man who had changed her world. She took a step forward, reached out, and gently grasped his hands, helping him stand back up. She looked into his eyes, a radiant smile breaking through her tears. "Yes," she whispered, squeezing his hands tightly. "Yes." Without wasting a single second, Richard wrapped his arms around her waist, pulled her flush against him, and kissed her with a deep, consuming love. The stadium erupted into absolute pandemonium, fireworks shooting into the night sky, but for Richard and Verona, there was only the quiet, unbreakable sanctuary they had found in each other.
Some stories are too powerful to remain hidden in the dark. If you want to find out more Afro-Korean stories, click the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and join us here at Tales Unsaid, where the deepest secrets are finally brought to light. New stories drop weekly, so make sure you don't miss a single word.